March 3, 1943, Bismarck Sea, north of New Guinea. Commander Yoshimori Yasuda stood on the bridge of the transport ship Kyokusei Maru, scanning the horizon with experienced eyes. The convoy of 8 transports and 8 destroyers carried 6,900 troops of the 51st Division, desperately needed reinforcements for the garrison at Leh. The mathematics of Pacific naval operations gave him confidence. American bombers attacking from altitude couldn't hit moving ships with conventional bombs. The statistics proved it. High-level bombing achieved perhaps 2% accuracy against maneuvering vessels. His convoy would reach Leh with acceptable losses, perhaps 1 transport damaged at most. Then he saw them. 5 twin-engine aircraft approaching at wave-top height, their profiles unmistakable. B-25 Mitchell bombers. Yasuda relaxed slightly. Mitchell bombers attacking at mast height was suicide. Their belly-mounted guns couldn't depress enough to strafe effectively. Their bomb bay loads would be small. 5 aircraft couldn't inflict serious damage on a convoy this size before his destroyer escorts' anti-aircraft fire drove them away. What Commander Yasuda didn't know, what Japanese naval doctrine had never conceived possible, was that those approaching B-25s carried no bombs in their bays. Instead, 850 caliber machine guns protruded from their noses, capable of firing 800 rounds per second collectively, turning each aircraft into a flying gun platform that would rewrite the rules of anti-shipping warfare. In the next 60 seconds, as those guns opened fire, Yasuda would witness the birth of a tactical revolution that would doom Japanese shipping across the Southwest Pacific. The Kyokusei Maru, hit by 6,000 rounds in a single strafing pass, would explode and sink within 10 minutes. Before the day ended, all 8 transports and 4 destroyers would rest on the ocean floor. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea would introduce the Imperial Japanese Navy to America's secret weapon, not superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but audacious innovation that transformed conventional bombers into the most effective ship killers in the Pacific theater. The story of how that transformation occurred begins not in engineering laboratories or military planning rooms, but in the creative mind of a civilian pilot turned warrior who saw possibilities where military doctrine saw limitations. Paul Irvin "Pappy" Gunn would take the B-25 Mitchell, a medium bomber designed for conventional operations, and turn it into a weapon Japanese naval forces had no defense against. His modifications would sink more Japanese ships than any other single tactical innovation of the Pacific War. 6 months before the Bismarck Sea, in September 1942, the Southwest Pacific Theater faced a critical challenge. Japanese shipping moved relatively freely between strongholds, supplying isolated garrisons, reinforcing threatened positions, evacuating casualties. American bombers attacked these convoys from high altitude with minimal success. The Japanese had learned that violent maneuvering at the moment of bomb release made hits nearly impossible. Studies showed that conventional bombing runs against ships achieved accuracy rates between 1% and 3%. For every 100 bombs dropped, 97 missed their targets. At Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, Major Paul "Pappy" Gunn studied these dismal statistics with growing frustration. A 51-year-old former Navy enlisted man turned civilian pilot, Gunn had joined the Army Air Forces in the Philippines when war began. He'd evacuated his family just before Japanese forces captured Manila, then watched helplessly as his wife and children spent 3 years in Japanese prison camps. This personal stake made him perhaps the most motivated innovator in the Pacific theater. Gunn had already established a reputation for battlefield modifications. He'd installed additional machine guns in a 20 Havoc attack bombers, turning them into more effective strafers. He'd developed skip bombing techniques, where bombs were released at extremely low altitude to skip across the water into ship hulls. But these modifications had limitations. The A-20 was too small to carry devastating firepower. Skip bombing required perfect execution and left aircraft vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire for extended periods. The B-25 Mitchell presented different possibilities. This twin-engine medium bomber built by North American Aviation had entered service in 1941. Named for General Billy Mitchell, pioneer of American air power, it was designed as a conventional medium bomber carrying a ton of bombs at 270 miles per hour with a crew of 6. The standard B-25C featured a clear plexiglass nose section housing a bombardier, a single 50 caliber machine gun in the nose, dorsal and ventral turrets and waist guns. It was a capable aircraft, but conventional in every respect. Guns saw something others didn't. The B-25's solid construction, powerful engines and relatively spacious fuselage could accommodate radical modification. What if the transparent nose section was replaced with a solid nose? What if that solid nose was packed with forward-firing guns? What if the bombardier's position was eliminated entirely in favor of pure strafing capability? The idea violated conventional doctrine. Medium bombers weren't fighters or attack aircraft. They bombed from altitude, period. But Gunn wasn't bound by convention. Working with a small team of mechanics at Townsville, Australia, he began experimenting on a single B-25C in October 1942. They removed the clear nose section entirely, replacing it with a solid metal fairing. Into this new nose, they installed 4 50 caliber Browning machine guns, doubling the aircraft's forward firepower. The modification was crude, accomplished with salvaged materials and improvised mounting brackets. The guns weren't even properly synchronized, but when Gunn test-fired the modified bomber over an abandoned Japanese barge, the results stunned everyone who witnessed it. The 4-gun Strafer delivered twice the firepower of standard attack aircraft. The 50 caliber rounds, each weighing nearly 2 ounces, could penetrate ship superstructures, shred aircraft on the ground, and devastate troop concentrations. The psychological impact was equally significant. The roar of 4 synchronized guns firing 400 rounds per second created a sound unlike anything Japanese forces had experienced. More importantly, the B-25's size allowed it to carry both guns and bombs, giving it flexibility conventional fighters lacked. Word of Gunn's modification reached General George C. Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force. Kenney, himself an innovative thinker who encouraged battlefield modifications, immediately recognized the potential. He authorized Gunn to modify additional aircraft and establish a formal program, but Gunn wasn't satisfied with 4 guns. If 4 guns worked, 8 would be better. If violence of action mattered, overwhelming violence would be decisive. By December 1942, Gunn's team had perfected what would become the standard Pacific B-25 Strafer configuration. The clear bombardier nose was replaced with a solid metal nose housing 4 50 caliber machine guns in a tight cluster. 2 additional guns were mounted in blisters on each side of the forward fuselage. Another 2 guns were installed in the lower forward fuselage. The total, 8 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns, all controlled by the pilot. The ammunition load was staggering. Each gun carried between 350 and 400 rounds, providing nearly 3,000 rounds of total firepower. At the combined cyclic rate of 800 rounds per minute, a pilot could fire continuously for over 20 seconds before exhausting ammunition. In practice, firing in 3 to 4 second bursts, a single Strafer could devastate multiple targets on a single pass. The modifications didn't stop with guns. Gunn's team removed the bombardier's position entirely, along with the Norden bomb sight and associated equipment. This weight savings allowed additional ammunition and armor protection. They reinforced the nose section to handle recoil forces from 8 synchronized guns firing simultaneously. They installed new electrical systems to power the guns and modified the pilot's controls to manage all 8 weapons. The result was an aircraft unlike anything in American or Japanese arsenals. It wasn't a fighter, it was too large and slow. It wasn't a conventional bomber, it carried minimal bomb load. It was something new, a gunship optimized for low-altitude attacks on ships, ground targets, and enemy installations. The Japanese had no tactical doctrine to counter it, because nothing like it existed in their operational experience. Testing began in January 1943 against beached Japanese vessels and ground targets. The results exceeded even Gunn's optimistic predictions. A 3-second burst from all 8 guns put over 300 half-inch projectiles into a target area roughly 30 feet in diameter. Ships couldn't withstand such concentration of fire. Superstructures disintegrated, fuel tanks exploded, personnel were swept from decks. The Strafer created not just damage, but catastrophic destruction. The first combat test came on February 21, 1943, during a raid on Madang Harbour, New Guinea. 6 modified B-25s attacked Japanese shipping and shore installations. The results were devastating. 2 cargo ships were left burning and sinking. Shore installations were demolished. Ground personnel scattered in panic from the unexpected firepower. Not a single American aircraft was lost. General Kenny immediately ordered maximum production of Strafer conversions. Modification teams were established at Townsville and Port Moresby. B-25Cs arriving from the United States went directly to modification shops before entering combat. By March 1943, the 5th Air Force had over 30 Strafer-configured B-25s operational, with more arriving weekly. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea would test these modifications against the largest Japanese naval operation since Guadalcanal. Intelligence reports indicated a major convoy departing Rabaul on February 28, 1943, heading for Leh. The convoy comprised 8 transport ships carrying 6,900 troops, escorted by 8 destroyers. Japanese planners assumed they could move this force undetected through bad weather, and that conventional high-altitude bombing would inflict minimal damage. They were catastrophically wrong on both counts. Allied reconnaissance located the convoy on March 1st, tracking it continuously. General Kenny assembled every available aircraft. Australian Beaufighters, American B-17 flying fortresses for high-altitude bombing, A-20 Havocs for skip bombing, and 13 modified B-25 Strafers. The plan combined multiple attack methods, with the Strafers delivering the decisive blow. March 2nd brought the first attacks. B-17S bombed from altitude with predictable results. Near misses that caused minor damage but sank no ships. Japanese anti-aircraft fire remained intense but uncoordinated. The convoy continued toward Leh, maintaining formation, commanders confident they would reach port with acceptable losses. March 3rd dawned clear, perfect weather for air operations. This was the day the Strafers would reveal their full capabilities. Commander Yasuda stood on Kyokusei Maru's bridge, reviewing damage reports from the previous day's attacks. 1 transport damaged, but still operational. 7 transports undamaged. The mathematics still favored Japanese success. They were now within 150 miles of Leh. 1 more day and the reinforcements would land. At 10 a.m. the attacks intensified. A-20 Havocs skip-bombed the convoy, their low-altitude approach catching defenders by surprise. The transport Nojima was hit and began sinking. The destroyer Shirayuki attempted to rescue survivors while maintaining anti-aircraft fire. The convoy's formation loosened as ships maneuvered independently to avoid bombs. Then came the sound that Japanese sailors would describe in terror for the rest of their lives. A deep, continuous roar unlike conventional aircraft. 13 B-25 Strafers approached in loose formation at 50 feet above the waves, their 8-gun batteries already tracking targets. The Japanese gunners opened fire, but the Strafers came too fast and too low for effective engagement. Captain Kenneth McCullough led the first flight of 5 Strafers directly at Kyokusei Maru. From 3,000 yards, the ship appeared enormous through his gun sight. He opened fire at 2,000 yards, all 8 guns converging on the ship's superstructure. The concentrated fire was beyond anything Japanese forces had experienced. 50 caliber rounds penetrated the bridge, engine room, and fuel storage areas simultaneously. Crew members attempting to man deck guns were swept away by the storm of lead. McCullough's 3-second burst put approximately 320 rounds into Kyokusei Maru. The next Strafer in formation added another 300 rounds. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th aircraft each contributed similar volumes of fire. In 15 seconds, over 1,550 caliber rounds struck a single transport. The ship didn't just suffer damage, it was destroyed as a functioning vessel. Fires erupted across multiple decks. The engine room flooded from below waterline penetrations. The bridge was a charnel house. Commander Yasuda survived the initial strafing only to witness his ship's death throes. The Kyokusei Maru listed heavily to port, her decks swept by continuous explosions as ammunition stores cooked off. He gave the order to abandon ship at 10:15 a.m. The vessel capsized and sank by 10:25 a.m., carrying hundreds of troops who couldn't escape the flooding compartments. The other strafers distributed their attention across the convoy with mathematical precision. Each transport received multiple strafing passes from different aircraft. The destroyers, attempting to screen the transports, became targets themselves. The destroyer Shirayuki, already stopped to rescue survivors, was caught by 3 strafers. The concentrated fire killed or wounded most of her crew, destroyed her superstructure, and ignited fires that eventually reached her magazines. She exploded at 11:30 a.m. Japanese anti-aircraft fire intensified desperately. Gunners who had trained to track high-altitude bombers now faced targets 50 feet above the waves, traveling 250 miles per hour. The closing rate left seconds to acquire, track, and fire. Most gunners never completed the sequence before the strafers flashed past, leaving destruction in their wake. The few hits scored on strafers caused damage, but didn't prevent them from completing their attacks and returning to base. By noon on March 3rd, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was effectively over. All 8 transports were sinking or already sunk. 4 destroyers were destroyed or sinking. The remaining 4 destroyers fled toward Rabaul, carrying a few hundred survivors from the 6,900 troops that had begun the voyage. The convoy had been annihilated in a battle lasting less than 3 hours. American losses: 1 B-17, 1 P-38 fighter, and 13 airmen. Japanese losses: 12 ships, approximately 3,000 troops killed, another 1,500 wounded. The Strafer modifications had transformed the tactical equation. Where conventional bombing achieved 2% accuracy, the Strafers achieved nearly 100% effectiveness. Every ship they attacked suffered catastrophic damage. Every attack run produced decisive results. The innovation that had begun in Papigun's improvised workshop had just changed Pacific naval warfare forever. Japanese naval officers who survived the Bismarck Sea returned to Rabaul in shock. Their after-action reports described weapons they had never encountered. The enemy employed a new aircraft type, attacking at extremely low altitude with extraordinary firepower. Ships had no defense against these attacks. Evasive maneuvering provided no protection. The firepower exceeded anything in our experience. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, commanding the destroyer escort force, filed a report that Japanese naval headquarters initially dismissed as exaggeration. The enemy aircraft approached at wave height with forward-firing weapons of unprecedented power. A single pass destroyed ship superstructures completely. Multiple passes guaranteed ship destruction. Our anti-aircraft weapons could not track or engage effectively at these altitudes and speeds. What Japanese commanders didn't yet understand was that they had witnessed only the beginning. The Strafer modifications would expand throughout 1943 and 1944, with new variants adding even more firepower. The B-25G model, developed by North American Aviation incorporating guns field modifications into factory production, mounted a 75mm cannon in the nose, along with 4 50 caliber machine guns. The B-25H variant carried a 75mm cannon, 14 50 caliber machine guns, 8 forward firing, 4 in waist positions, 2 in tail, and could carry 8 5-inch rockets on underwing pylons. These factory-produced gunships represented the culmination of Papigun's innovation, transformed from battlefield modification into standard production. By 1944, North American aviation was delivering B-25s optimized for low-altitude anti-shipping and ground attack missions, with armor protection, additional ammunition capacity, and refined gun installations that made them even more effective than the original field modifications. But in March 1943, the Japanese didn't know about future developments. They only knew that American innovation had created a weapon they couldn't counter. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Japanese ship captains began refusing daylight movements in areas where strafers operated. Convoys attempted to move only at night or during bad weather. Critical supplies didn't reach forward positions. Troop reinforcements were delayed or cancelled. The strategic implications multiplied. American forces planning amphibious operations suddenly had unprecedented air support. B-25 Strafers could suppress shore defenses, destroy anchored shipping, and provide close air support for landing forces. The flexibility of combining bombs, rockets, and concentrated gunfire in a single platform gave ground commanders capabilities they had never possessed. As news of the Bismarck Sea victory spread through American forces, morale soared. The innovation that had seemed crazy to conventional thinkers had proved devastating in execution. Pappy Gunn, the civilian-turned-warrior, had delivered what formal military planning had never conceived. A weapon that rendered Japanese naval movements suicidal in daylight. General Kenny recognized Gunn's contribution immediately. He awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. But for Gunn, the greatest satisfaction would come later, in 1945, when his wife and children were liberated from Japanese prison camps. He had spent 3 years fighting not just for victory, but for their freedom. The Strafer modifications were his weapon in that personal war. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked a turning point in Pacific naval warfare. Before March 3, 1943, Japanese naval movements faced only conventional threats: high-altitude bombing with minimal accuracy, torpedo attacks by limited numbers of aircraft, submarine interdiction. After March 3rd, every Japanese ship in the Southwest Pacific operated under sentence of death if caught in daylight by strafer formations. The Japanese attempted countermeasures throughout 1943, but none proved effective. They added anti-aircraft guns to transports, but more guns meant more weight and less cargo capacity. They developed evasive maneuvering tactics, but ships couldn't evade weapons firing 800 rounds per second at point-blank range. They tried fighter escorts, but Japanese fighters couldn't stay with low-flying strafers through anti-aircraft fire that threatened both attackers and defenders. Most devastatingly for Japanese logistics, they had no answer to the strafers' combination of speed, firepower, and flexibility. A single B-25 strafer represented the hitting power of multiple conventional attack aircraft. Formations of strafers delivered overwhelming violence that no target could withstand. The innovation had achieved what military theorists called a force multiplier effect. Each aircraft accomplished more than multiple conventional aircraft could achieve. The human cost on Japanese shipping was staggering. Between March 1943 and August 1945, B-25 strafers sank hundreds of Japanese vessels, transports, cargo ships, tankers, destroyers, and smaller craft. The exact number remains disputed because Japanese records were incomplete and often destroyed, but American claims exceeded 300 ships of various sizes sunk or damaged by B-25 strafer attacks. More significant than the ships destroyed was the shipping disrupted. Japanese planners couldn't move supplies reliably in areas where strafers operated. This isolation doomed garrisons throughout the Southwest Pacific. Bases that should have been resupplied regularly went months without supplies. Troops that should have been reinforced remained at reduced strength. The strafers' existence created a logistical blockade more effective than physical barriers could achieve. The tactical versatility of the B-25 strafer became apparent throughout 1943 as crews discovered applications beyond anti-shipping warfare. At Cape Gloucester in December 1943, Strafers devastated Japanese beach defences hours before Marines landed. The concentrated firepower silenced pillboxes, destroyed supply dumps, and shattered Japanese defensive positions. Marines reported that Strafer support was more effective than naval gunfire, because pilots could identify and engage specific targets rather than bombarding general areas. In the Philippines campaign of 1944 to 1945, Strafers proved equally devastating against ground targets. Japanese airfields, supply columns, troop concentrations, and headquarters installations all fell victim to 8-gun strafing passes. The psychological impact on Japanese ground forces was profound. Soldiers who survived Strafer attacks described the sound as terrifying, beyond conventional bombing. The roar of 8 machine guns firing simultaneously, combined with the visual impact of tracers converging from a single aircraft, created panic that broke unit cohesion. Captain Richard Ellis, who flew 47 Strafer missions, described the weapon's effectiveness in a 1944 interview. "You line up on a target at 50 feet altitude, open up at 2,000 yards, and walk your fire into the target. The tracer streams look like solid bars of light. You see superstructures disintegrating, fuel tanks exploding, personnel scattering. Then you're past the target and already looking for the next one. It's the most effective anti-shipping weapon anyone has ever deployed." The Japanese developed respect for Strafer pilots that bordered on fear. Captured documents from late 1943 included warnings about modified twin-engine bombers with extraordinary forward armament. Japanese intelligence correctly identified these as B-25s, but underestimated their numbers and overestimated their vulnerability. A January 1944 intelligence summary claimed, "The enemy employs approximately 40 to 50 modified bombers with enhanced armament. While dangerous when they achieve surprise, these aircraft are vulnerable to fighter interception and concentrated anti-aircraft fire." The actual numbers were far higher. By January 1944, the 5th Air Force operated over 120 Strafer-configured B-25s, with more arriving weekly. The 13th Air Force in the Solomons had adopted similar modifications. Even the 10th Air Force in the China-Burma-India theater began converting B-25s to Strafer configuration for anti-shipping operations in the South China Sea. The weapon that began as one man's innovation had become standard doctrine across the Pacific theater. Japanese vulnerability to Strafers stemmed from multiple factors beyond just firepower. Japanese ships lacked the radar fire control that American vessels possessed. Their anti-aircraft guns relied on visual tracking, making low-altitude, high-speed targets nearly impossible to engage effectively. Japanese fighters, optimized for dogfighting and bomber interception, struggled to intercept fast-moving strafers at wave-top altitude, where any mistake meant crashing into the ocean. Most critically, Japanese doctrine had never anticipated this type of attack. Their naval training emphasized defense against high-altitude bombing and torpedo attacks. Gun crews drilled in tracking aircraft at altitude, not at 50 feet. Ship maneuvers focused on avoiding torpedoes and bombs, not evading strafing fire. When strafers appeared, Japanese crews attempted to apply conventional tactics to an unconventional threat, with predictably catastrophic results. The effectiveness of Strafer attacks can be measured in specific engagements throughout 1943 to 1944. On September 17, 1943, B-25 Strafers attacked a convoy near Finschhafen, sinking the destroyers Hatsuyuki and Fumizuki along with the transport Kotatsu Maru. All 3 ships were destroyed by strafing fire alone, without bombs or torpedoes. The mission report noted that over 18,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition were fired in 15 minutes of combat. Japanese survivors reported that the concentrated fire was like being attacked by an entire squadron of fighters. At Wewak on August 17, 1943, Strafers demonstrated effectiveness against airfield targets. 54 B-25s, including 38 Strafers, attacked Japanese airfields in coordinated strikes. The Strafers destroyed approximately 100 Japanese aircraft on the ground, damaged facilities, and killed dozens of ground personnel. The raid crippled Japanese air power in New Guinea for months. Japanese records described the attack as devastating beyond all previous experience. The human stories behind these statistics reveal the Strafers' psychological impact. Lieutenant Sadao Takamatsu, a Japanese Navy pilot shot down and captured in November 1943, provided detailed testimony about Strafer operations. "We received warnings about the modified bombers. Our commanders told us they were few in number and vulnerable to our fighters. This was lies. I witnessed a Strafer attack on our convoy near Rabaul. 3 aircraft destroyed 5 ships in minutes. The firepower was unbelievable. Ships were cut apart like paper. We could not defend against such weapons. Japanese attempts to develop countermeasures failed repeatedly. They experimented with explosive-filled balloons tethered above ships to deter low-altitude attacks. Strafers simply attacked from angles that avoided the balloons or destroyed them with gunfire. They tried deploying fighter squadrons specifically to intercept Strafers, but American fighters escorting the B-25s engaged and destroyed Japanese interceptors before they could reach the Strafers. They even attempted kamikaze attacks against Strafer formations, but the high-speed, low-altitude tactics made such attacks nearly impossible to coordinate. The industrial dimension of the Strafer program revealed American advantages beyond tactical innovation. North American aviation, producing B-25s at factories in Kansas City and Inglewood, California, delivered 9,816 B-25s during the war. While not all were Strafer configured, the production capacity allowed dedicated Strafer squadrons without reducing conventional bomber availability. Japan, by contrast, produced approximately 5,000 total twin-engine bombers during the entire war, none of which could match the Strafers' specialized capabilities. The ammunition expenditure demonstrated American industrial abundance. A single Strafer mission might fire 2,000 to 3,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition per aircraft. A squadron of 12 Strafers could expend 36,000 rounds in a single mission. The 5th Air Force conducted Strafer missions almost daily throughout 1943 to 1944, consuming millions of rounds monthly. Japan, struggling to produce basic ammunition for infantry weapons, had no answer to this volume of fire. Maintenance of Strafer aircraft required specialized skills and extensive spare parts. The modifications added weight and stress to airframes. The guns required constant cleaning and alignment. Electrical systems supporting 8 synchronized weapons needed frequent attention. Yet American maintenance crews kept Strafer squadrons operational at rates exceeding 80% availability. Japanese aircraft maintenance, hampered by parts shortages and overtaxed ground crews, achieved perhaps 50% availability for conventional bombers. The Strafer modifications influenced post-war aircraft design profoundly. The AC-47 Spooky gunship used in Vietnam traced its lineage directly to Pappy Gun's innovations. The AC-130 gunships that proved devastating in Iraq and Afghanistan represented the culmination of concepts developed with the B-25 Strafer, overwhelming firepower delivered from aircraft optimized for the ground attack role rather than air-to-air combat. By mid-1944, the strategic situation in the Pacific had shifted dramatically. American forces advanced through the Central Pacific, while MacArthur's Southwest Pacific forces moved through New Guinea toward the Philippines. Japanese shipping struggled to maintain supply lines under constant Strafer threat. The weapon that had seemed innovative in 1943 had become standard doctrine by 1944, with tactics refined through hundreds of combat missions. The Battle of Ormoc Bay in November-December 1944 demonstrated Strafer effectiveness in a complex operational environment. Japanese forces attempted to reinforce their Philippines garrison through Ormoc Bay on Leyte's west coast. American intelligence detected these movements and deployed Strafers along with other aircraft to interdict the supply convoys. Over 3 weeks, Strafers sank dozens of transports, cargo ships, and escorts attempting to reach Ormoc. The Japanese garrison on Leyte, cut off from resupply, eventually collapsed. Japanese naval officers who survived these engagements testified to the psychological impact. Commander Toshikazu Omai, operations officer for the combined fleet, wrote in his memoirs, "The American modified bombers made daylight shipping operations suicidal. We lost entire convoys in minutes. The firepower from a single aircraft exceeded what we thought possible. This weapon, more than submarines or carrier aircraft, strangled our logistics." The final year of the war saw strafers operating with impunity across the Pacific. In the Philippines, strafers attacked Japanese shipping in Manila Bay, sinking dozens of vessels that had taken refuge in supposedly protected anchorages. In Borneo, strafers devastated Japanese oil facilities and tankers, cutting fuel supplies to the home islands. In the China coast, strafers intercepted convoys attempting to move supplies from mainland China to besieged island garrisons. The human cost of Strafer operations extended beyond ship crews to ground forces dependent on those ships. Japanese garrisons throughout the Pacific faced starvation and disease because strafers had destroyed the shipping that should have resupplied them. The garrison at Rabaul, once a major Japanese naval base, withered to ineffectiveness because strafers sank every supply convoy attempting to reach it. By 1945, Rabaul's 100,000 troops were reduced to growing vegetables to avoid starvation, their combat effectiveness destroyed without direct ground combat. Papi Gun continued refining strafer tactics throughout 1944. His innovations extended beyond the original gun modifications to include tactics, ammunition selection, and coordination with other aircraft types. He developed the concept of commerce destroyer operations, where strafers would patrol known shipping lanes, attacking any Japanese vessels encountered. These operations, conducted by small formations or even single aircraft, created the maritime equivalent of submarine warfare, but with immediate results visible to the attacking pilots. The Distinguished Service Cross awarded to Gunn in 1943 was followed by additional recognition. He received the Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, and Air Medal with clusters. More importantly, his innovations were studied and adopted throughout the Army Air Forces. The official Tactical Doctrine Manual for B-25 operations, published in 1944, devoted entire chapters to strafer tactics, techniques, and employment, all derived from Gunn's battlefield innovations. Personal tragedies marked Gunn's war. His son, Navy Ensign Paul "Pip" Gunn Jr., was killed in October 1942 when his torpedo bomber was shot down during the Battle of Santa Cruz. Gunn learned of his son's death while working on strafer modifications. Rather than being crushed by grief, he redoubled his efforts, driven by the belief that better weapons would save other sons from his son's fate. The liberation of his wife and children from Japanese prison camps in 1945 provided Gunn with personal closure. Julie Gunn and her children had survived 3 years of captivity, though weakened by malnutrition and disease. Papi Gunn's reunion with his family became one of the war's emotional stories, a reminder that behind military innovations lay human motivations. In Gunn's case, the desperate desire to free his family and punish those who had imprisoned them. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, strafer-configured B-25s had compiled a combat record unmatched by any other aircraft in the anti-shipping role. Conservative estimates credited strafers with sinking or damaging over 300 Japanese vessels. More liberal estimates, including smaller craft and damaged vessels that later sank, exceeded 500 ships. The exact number remains disputed, but the strategic impact is undeniable. Japanese shipping in the Southwest Pacific was effectively neutralized by strafer operations. The post-war analysis of strafer effectiveness revealed insights into military innovation. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, conducting comprehensive studies of air power effectiveness, concluded that the B-25 Strafer modifications represented one of the most cost-effective innovations of the Pacific War. The relatively simple modifications transformed existing aircraft into weapons that achieved strategic effects disproportionate to their numbers. Japanese post-war assessments acknowledged the Strafers' impact explicitly. The Japanese Demobilization Bureau's official history noted, "The American employment of heavily armed twin-engine bombers in the anti-shipping role created a threat we could not effectively counter. These weapons contributed significantly to the destruction of our logistics system and the isolation of our forward positions." Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, who commanded Japanese forces at Rabaul during the Strafers' introduction, testified at post-war interrogations. "We knew immediately that the Americans had developed a weapon against which we had no defense. The modified bombers destroyed shipping faster than we could replace vessels. This single innovation, combined with submarine warfare, ensured our logistics would fail." The lessons of the Strafer program influenced post-war American military aviation profoundly. The concept that aircraft could be modified in theater to address specific threats became doctrine. The notion that overwhelming firepower could substitute for precision became accepted wisdom. The recognition that innovation often came from unconventional thinkers rather than formal planning staffs changed how the military approached problem-solving. Pappy Gunn's legacy extended beyond the specific modifications he developed. He proved that civilian expertise could contribute decisively to military operations. He demonstrated that battlefield innovations could outperform laboratory developments. He showed that one motivated individual with mechanical skills and tactical insight could change the course of campaigns. His story became a case study taught at military schools as an example of the power of innovative thinking under combat conditions. The B-25 Strafer represents a unique moment in military history, a weapon developed not through formal requirements processes, but through battlefield necessity and individual genius. It wasn't the result of years of research, carefully coordinated development programs, or systematic testing. It emerged from one man's frustration with conventional methods and his willingness to experiment with unauthorized modifications that violated doctrine and regulation. The Japanese never developed an effective counter to the Strafer because they couldn't replicate the conditions that created it. Japanese military culture emphasized strict adherence to doctrine, formal planning, and centralized decision-making. The idea that a civilian-turned officer would independently modify aircraft and develop new tactics without authorization was incompatible with their system. When they encountered the results, they struggled to understand how such innovations emerged from what they perceived as chaotic American military organization. This cultural difference extended beyond just the Strafer. Throughout the Pacific War, American forces demonstrated adaptability that Japanese forces couldn't match. When standard tactics failed, Americans innovated. When equipment proved inadequate, they modified it. When doctrine didn't fit circumstances, they ignored it. The Strafer exemplified this American characteristic, the willingness to try unconventional solutions to conventional problems. The final accounting of Strafer operations reveals statistics that tell only part of the story. Yes, Strafers sank hundreds of ships, killed thousands of enemy personnel, and destroyed countless ground targets. But the strategic impact exceeded these tactical achievements. The Strafers' existence forced Japanese planners to abandon entire classes of operations. Daylight convoy movements stopped. Coastal shipping became suicidal. Barge traffic moved only at night. This disruption to logistics weakened Japanese forces more effectively than direct combat could have achieved. The human dimension of the Strafer story deserves remembering. Thousands of American aircrew flew these modified bombers into intense anti-aircraft fire at altitudes where any hit could be fatal. The losses, while lower than other bomber types, were still significant. Approximately 150 B-25 Strafers were lost to enemy action in the Pacific, carrying perhaps 900 aircrew members. Each of these men volunteered for missions they knew were dangerous, flying aircraft that couldn't escape if damaged at low altitude. Japanese perspectives on the Strafer evolved from skepticism to terror to grudging respect. Early encounters generated reports of suicide attacks by modified bombers. Later assessments recognized the tactical sophistication. These weren't desperation attacks but calculated strikes using specialized weapons. Final Japanese analyses acknowledged that the Strafer represented American innovation at its most effective, taking existing equipment and transforming it into something entirely new through creative modification. The technological legacy of the Strafer extended into the Cold War and beyond. When the United States needed gunships for Vietnam, designers looked back at the B-25 Strafer's success. The AC-47, AC-119, and AC-130 gunships all embodied Strafer principles, heavy, survivable platforms carrying massive firepower optimized for ground attack. These aircraft proved decisive in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and numerous other conflicts, tracing their lineage directly to Pappy Gunn's modifications in a primitive Australian workshop. The Strafer's story also influenced how military organizations think about innovation. The recognition that valuable ideas can come from unconventional sources led to more formal programs for capturing and implementing field modifications. The Army's rapid fielding process, the Air Force's operational needs statements, and the Navy's urgent operational requirements all descended from lessons learned when Pappy Gunn's modifications proved more effective than formally developed weapons. In 1986, Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame, recognition that came decades after his 1957 death. The citation noted his innovative modifications of aircraft that changed the course of the Pacific Air War. By then, most Americans had forgotten the Strafer story, unaware that one of World War II's most effective weapons had been developed not in factories or laboratories, but in field workshops by a determined civilian who refused to accept conventional limitations. The Japanese, for their part, never forgot. Post-war histories of the Pacific War consistently cite the B-25 Strafer as one of the weapons that most effectively disrupted Japanese operations. Naval histories acknowledge that Strafer attacks rendered daylight shipping movements impossible in contested areas. Ground force histories describe how Strafer support overwhelmed defensive positions. The weapon that surprised Commander Yasuda in March 1943 remained in Japanese military memory as an example of American innovative superiority. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea, where the Strafer proved its value definitively, is commemorated differently by victor and vanquished. American histories celebrate it as a decisive tactical victory that validated innovative tactics and weapons. Japanese histories remember it as the moment when they realized American innovation had made their naval operations untenable. Both perspectives acknowledge the same truth. 8 machine guns in the nose of a modified bomber changed Pacific warfare forever. The title of this story asks what Japan never expected. The answer encompasses more than just 8 guns in a bomber's nose. Japan never expected that American military culture would permit unauthorized modifications. They never expected that battlefield innovations would be adopted faster than formal development programs. They never expected that a civilian would revolutionize anti-shipping tactics. They never expected that democratic chaos would produce better results than totalitarian order. Most fundamentally, Japan never expected that the nation they had dismissed as soft and mechanically focused would out-innovate them technically and tactically. The Strafer represented everything Japanese military planners had failed to anticipate about American warfare: the mechanical ingenuity, the willingness to experiment, the rapid adoption of successful innovations, and the industrial capacity to produce modified weapons in quantity without reducing standard equipment production. Commander Yasuda, standing on Kyokusei Maru's bridge in March 1943, expected to face conventional bombing at high altitude, which his ships could evade through maneuvering. He expected perhaps torpedo attacks, which his destroyer escorts could counter. He never expected to face aircraft carrying 8 machine guns firing 800 rounds per second at point-blank range. His shock in those final minutes before his ship sank represented Japan's broader surprise. America had changed the rules of Pacific warfare, and Japan had no effective response. The legacy of the B-25 Strafer endures in multiple forms. The aircraft themselves, several dozen of which survive in museums worldwide, stand as physical reminders of innovation under fire. The tactics developed for Strafer employment influenced close air support doctrine for decades. The recognition that existing platforms could be radically modified for specialized roles became accepted practice. The memory of Pappy Gunn's genius lives on in military innovation programs that seek to replicate his success. For the men who flew Strafers, the experience marked them permanently. The intensity of low-altitude combat, the immediate feedback of seeing targets destroyed, and the knowledge that they were employing a weapon unique in warfare created bonds and memories that lasted lifetimes. Strafer pilot reunions, held annually until the last survivors passed in the early 2000s, celebrated not just their victories, but their participation in one of warfare's most innovative moments. The Japanese perspective on the Strafer evolved through defeat into respect. Post-war Japanese military officers studying American operations focused particularly on the Strafer program as an example of effective military innovation. The rapid development from concept to operational deployment, the willingness to modify equipment radically, and the tactical imagination to employ the weapon effectively all became case studies in Japanese military education. The nation that had suffered under Strafer attacks came to admire the innovation that created them. The final lesson of the Strafer story transcends specific tactics or technologies. It demonstrates that in warfare, as in other human endeavors, innovation and adaptability often matter more than initial superiority. Japan entered the Pacific War with superior torpedoes, better carrier aircraft, more experienced pilots, and detailed war plans. America responded with innovation, radar fire control, proximity fuses, code breaking, and the B-25 Strafer. By war's end, American innovations had neutralized Japanese advantages and created new capabilities Japanese forces couldn't match. Pappy Gun, working in primitive conditions with salvaged materials and small teams of mechanics, created a weapon that contributed more to Pacific victory than weapons that cost millions and required years to develop. His story proves that genius can appear anywhere, that innovation doesn't require perfect conditions, and that one person's determination can change history. These lessons remain relevant today, reminding us that the next transformative innovation might come not from planned programs, but from someone willing to look at existing tools in new ways. The B-25 Strafer sank ships, destroyed aircraft, and devastated ground targets throughout the Pacific War, but its greatest victory was psychological, proving to Japan that America's innovative spirit could overcome initial Japanese advantages. The Strafer demonstrated that American military culture, often dismissed as undisciplined and chaotic, could produce results that rigid Japanese planning could never match. This lesson, more than any tactical achievement, shaped the Pacific War's outcome. When the last B-25 Strafer flew its final combat mission in August 1945, it marked the end of one of warfare's most successful innovation stories. From Pappy Gun's first crude modifications to factory-produced gunships with 14 machine guns and a 75mm cannon, the Strafer had evolved from impossible idea to standard doctrine in less than 3 years. No Japanese weapon underwent comparable transformation because no Japanese system permitted comparable innovation. The Strafers story ends where it began, with the recognition that warfare rewards those who innovate effectively. Commander Yasuda's convoy entered the Bismarck Sea, expecting conventional attacks they could counter with conventional defenses. They encountered instead a weapon that rendered their defenses irrelevant and their expectations obsolete. In that gap between expectation and reality lay the Strafers' true power. The ability to present enemies with problems they couldn't solve because they had never imagined those problems existing. Japan never expected 8 nose guns to sink 12 ships in one pass. They never expected one man's modifications to change Pacific warfare. They never expected American innovation to prove more decisive than Japanese planning. The Strafer taught them these lessons through brutal experience, demonstrating that in modern warfare, the side that adapts fastest often wins decisively. The modified B-25 Mitchell bombers with their 8-gun batteries remain monuments to innovation, ingenuity, and the power of unconventional thinking. From Papigun's workshop to the Pacific skies, from Commander Yasuda's shock to Japan's defeat, the Strafer story demonstrates that sometimes the most effective weapons emerge not from formal planning, but from creative minds refusing to accept limitations. That lesson, delivered at 250 miles per hour and 800 rounds per minute, echoes through military history as a reminder that innovation wins wars.